It gives me such pleasure and excitement to introduce to you the two panelists for our next panel presentation, which is very cleverly titled NiFTy, NFT, Uses of NFTs and Other Emerging Technologies for Cybersecurity. And our presenters couldn't be more prepared for this topic. And I first want to state...
Elizabeth, you're really selling us hard, man. Go ahead.
It's my intent to keep you on the edge of your seat with this introduction, because I promise you, I will not be let down by these speakers. Devika Kornbacher just recently moved from her home law firm of E&E to Clifford Chance because she knows that she has a gift and a talent that requires the best platform for her to do exactly what she does. She has an incredible list of credentials, starting out with an engineering degree, undergrad, Harvard Law School. And when she was at Harvard Law School, she not only went to law school, but she worked with the Berkeley Center for Internet and Society and the Chief Technology Officer of Massachusetts. Remember all those prescriptive requirements? She was there. But she evolved, and now, all of these topics are never as old as Cheerios. All of these are brand new areas that people like us are learning from the pioneers in these areas. So I'm going to move on to Devika's co-presenter, who is Nick Donarski. Nick is got NFTs in his DNA. He has been practicing in the area of cybersecurity, network security, firewalls, and Linux for the last 22 years, since Y2K. He started with his high school being his first client when he was 18 years old. He has HP tattooed on his body. He's got a cool, really awesome t-shirt for those of you who are at home that has hacker on it. So we're in for a delightful presentation of how these NFTs can be used in a nifty way and other emerging technologies for cybersecurity. Devika and Nick.
Thank you so much. So yeah, we've been hyped up, so we're going to try to live up to that hype. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that. She did great intro, so I don't feel like, Nick, we need to add anything.
I'm
good,
I'm
right?
excited to be here.
Yeah, right. Okay, so let's just get to it because we only got 45 minutes and we both talk a lot. So starting off, what we want to do is kind of take you on a journey of why you should care about what we're going to say for the next 45 minutes. First, we're going to frame the goals. Like, what's the point? Nifty uses of NFTs and these emerging tech kind of conversations is we'll go back, way back to the concept of cybersecurity. So Nick talked about he started at 18. I won't talk about how old I am and what that means for me. But when I first started getting in the area, we'll talk about just CIA, the real basics, and then how that folds into all these new technologies and how each of them kind of still live to the code, the old code of that, and then legal compliance, because the people here are lawyers, right? Like, we're all lawyers.
How many are lawyers?
How many are lawyers in here?
Oh,
okay, well, there you go. So we'll talk about why this matters for you as a lawyer. Not only is it, it's great tech, but like, why should you care as a cybersecurity or data privacy lawyer? Then we'll talk about the history. This is where he comes in, his short history, 22 years, what we used to do. Then we'll end with the fun stuff. It's finding the future. What does this mean for you? What does this mean for your clients when it comes to using this tech for cybersecurity? And what are the watch outs? So going straight to it, I'm going to talk about the CIA, right? Not the agency, but the original concept of cybersecurity being keeping things confidential, keeping the integrity of the data so it's not being manipulated or changed, but then also making the data available. I think sometimes the A gets missed in all of this, that part of the whole goal of cybersecurity is to make sure whatever data, whatever information that is being secured is also kept available. So putting it in lock and key, turning everything into hashing it to where no one can find it is not the goal of cybersecurity.
It's balance, right?
Right.
So one of the analogies I use is, the safest computer that's ever been built or used is one sitting in an abandoned cabin in the middle of the woods, never turned on, never used, and all the rest, right? That's the most secure system that you'll ever have, something that nobody ever touches. But business use and application and the balance between nobody can access it and everyone can access it. That's where you find the matrix, right?
Right, right, and that's the key too. And then keeping it to what it was, integrity. Which, for those of you, we'll get to it. But I dabble in AI and ethics, and that integrity is really important. Keeping the data the way it was originally written, and then of course the confidential is the most obvious. But getting to the legal compliance piece is, we all know there's a myriad, and the presentation before us went through some of these. There is a myriad of federal regulations and state laws and local laws. Let's not even talk about San Francisco and the biometrics, but there's a bunch of laws out there. I boil that all down to, because I talk to clients and they're like, okay, so Devika, what do I do? I'm not going to memorize the law. What do I do? I was like, reasonable security measures. That's our goal. Like, I have one client who's like, give me a good C+ program. Right? Like, my goal is not to be the most secure, but I want to make sure that I meet reasonable security measures. And then there's also, so that's the legal side. I say we can boil it down to, you want to have reasonable security measures where you're middle of the pack with your peers. And then there's contractual obligations, though, that we never want to forget when we're looking at all these things, using NFTs, using AI, is what contractual obligations do you have? What covenants, what promises have you or your client made? And even service level agreements, that availability piece, right? That hack happens, that attack happens from the black hat side of Nick, because he has his white hat on right now, right? What does that mean for you contractually? And then the last piece that I always talk about when I talk about cybersecurity and legal compliance is the certifications, these industry standards that are out there. They're great shorthands, and people love using them, like PCI DSS. But there's so many levels to PCI DSS. I shouldn't say so many. It's
different areas.
There's
right.
different areas.
It applies at different locations within the organization, right?
Right. And then there's different ones for if you're actually touching the credit card data versus not. And I say that to say, as we think about using these technologies, also think about not just, is my client meeting the standard, but what piece of the standard must my client meet versus what piece of the standard have I contractually obligated my client to meet versus what piece of the standard does the law require me to meet.
Right. Everything written down doesn't mean that client has to actually have all of that in place, right? You know, the generalness or the openness of a lot of the regulatory information, the ambiguousness of what they actually align there, has to allow for you to apply that, right? It's not written in a way of, you have to deploy Cisco switches, you have to deploy Palo Alto firewalls, you have to deploy, you know, these specific technologies. It's really provided as a guideline. So understanding where your client actually is affected by those regulations not only cuts the cost that they actually have to expend across their cybersecurity program, but it also helps you be that expert, that subject matter expert that they're going to trust longer into the future.
Yeah. And so we got to speak the speak, right? And walk the walk as those who counsel in cybersecurity. But I want to go back with me, go to the Wayback Archive machine, back in the day where we did not have all, like, I don't know, does anybody use Tessian or have clients who use Tessian? It's an email system. Okay. Yeah, right there. See that look? There we go. We'll talk about it. But anyway, so it's this great way of doing things. Watch, I say great. It's an ubiquitous way of doing things when it comes to AI and emails. But I did want to take a moment and go back. And with this historical, I want to bring some audience participation in so we know what level of detail to go into. Who in here actually owns NFTs? Okay. All right. We got 3 of us. Okay. Who in here owns cryptocurrency? Okay, a few more. There we go. All right, so we got some cryptocurrency people in here. Thank you, thank you. Who in here thinks this is all just a big fad that will go away soon? All right, yeah. All right. Well, I mean, I appreciate that, Nick, right? But most people were like, oh, I think it is, but it's really not. And the point is, it's not going anywhere. But we're going to take a moment to think about where we came from, to know where we're going, to think about where we really need to be. So Nick, can you just? I put on this slide a few things, but talk about the old school. Now we're pressed on time, so
sure.
I'm gonna ask you to keep this to about a minute and a half. But can you talk about what we used to live in so we can compare it to what we have now?
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, right, there were no regulations. So I've been in this long before HIPAA, long before GLBA, long before any of these compliances. Even the word cyber was actually used in the industry. It used to be called information security, which is way less sexy. But back then it was, you had an IT guy who knew something about security, right? It was just, he knew that these are good practices, these are things that should be controlled, these are critical data elements, but there wasn't this influx of products off the shelf that you could purchase. There wasn't this influx of regulatory guidance. I mean, really there wasn't a lot of education focused on security in those early days, the late 90s. Microsoft was one of the big ones, obviously, with them having as much of a presence that they started really kind of building certificates. You had your CISSP, you had your CEH, that are all those kind of aged elements of the certification path. But it was, I have a firewall. That was my security, right?
Right.
The aspect of the internet and remote systems being integrated into our everyday lives has created this arc that's had to accelerate all of the understanding for the average user. You go back to 99 or you go back to the early 2000s, people didn't know anything other than username, password.
Well, and then McAfee antivirus.
Right.
Yeah.
You had McAfee, you had Symantec, those were the big ones. I mean, Microsoft didn't even have an AV at that point. So there just wasn't this whole understanding of that these were critical systems back then. People knew that they were, but it wasn't accepted by the business that, well, if my computers go down, then my business goes down. So all of these things have really kind of built out what we know of as cybersecurity today.
Yeah.
It's a combination of all of those hacks and all of those multi-million dollars that have been paid to bad guys. Like I said before, I must be in the wrong industry because they get paid better than I do. But it's all of that impact that's really kind of boiled up to where we are now. The antiviruses, MFA, hashing, encryption, all of those types of things, those are all reactive. Security is always reactive. And it's because it's generally cost prohibitive. For anybody out here, how many people have a bodyguard? Okay, that's what I expected. Why don't you have a bodyguard? Because there's no inherent threat, right? You haven't had something happen that says you need to expend the hours that costs to have somebody stand next to you. We now have actual historical reference, $44 million for the one breach, right? That's a big deal. That's why these organizations are now focused on the security, because the impact to the business is much bigger than it used to be.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And so the old school, we're making a whitelist, it's no longer, the reason why I mentioned that's no longer reasonable security measures, right? One thing to keep in mind is if somebody's got, I've got an information security system, it's probably not going to meet reasonable security measures anymore, because the standard is the bodyguard, not just the cop to show up afterwards to write down the report. Okay, that's it. That was our history lesson. We're back in the present. Now we're going to find our future. So I'm actually going to run through this, Nick, quickly and ask.
Yeah, go for it.
But I want you to talk about anyway. So Nick's a gamer, which I love. I'm also a gamer. I owned a Atari and Nintendo. I try to play PlayStation when I can. My job doesn't let me play it much, but I try to. And one thing I tell people about the metaversal technologies, that's what I call it, not just metaverse, but the metaversal technologies, is they really are nested the way that we've got them on the slide. And I think it's important for those who have cryptocurrency, right, but not NFTs, to understand that all of that at the bottom is this blockchain thing. And we didn't want to presume too much. We don't have a whole lot of time, but we don't want to presume too much. So for those who didn't raise their hand for any of that, right, there's this thing at the bottom called a blockchain, a distributed ledger, that then on top of that sits a cryptocurrency. For example, we've got the WoW, we've got World of Warcraft.
World of Warcraft.
Can you just tell quickly why? Because that is we agree that's the original cryptocurrency. Can you say really quickly why?
Yeah, so if you go back, right, into when World of Warcraft launched, Call of Duty points, World of Warcraft gold, it's all the same thing. It's a digital currency. The reason, though, that WoW has kind of accelerated and been pulled off by itself is because there's a black market for it. There's black markets where people can go on and sell your gold to Chinese markets, Russian markets, things like that. There's actually real world application. You can go over to Asia and pay for food and hotel stays with World of Warcraft gold. So the application of a digital currency has been inherent in video games since the beginning. Yes. World of Warcraft, the economy of WoW, was actually taught at Harvard as an econ class. So the integration and the knowledge of what cryptocurrency is it's just a video game, currency at the end. Which
we're not going to talk about Gensler and gaming theory and what that might mean for Gary. Yeah, so we won't go there. But no, the reason why we say that, though, and I did want to bring it to games, is because at some level, cryptocurrency is that it's a reliance on this market, this community, to accept this as currency, right? Bitcoin was only $16 when Nick first bought his. Right now it's 21,000. I don't know what it is. I don't want to check my app, but whatever it is, it's a lot more money than 16. But that's because there was a market for it. So there's this blockchain that exists, but then cryptocurrency can only exist if there's a market for it. On top of that is NFTs, non-fungible tokens. It's the idea of, it's not cryptocurrency where it's just a coin. This thing has a unique inherent property that says Devika Kornbacher owns it. Because for those of you who own NFTs, we don't have time to go through it, but I'd love to talk. I love talking to people and say, why do you own NFT and what do you own? Because I've got the Bored Ape on there. Bored Apes, they started at a few $100s. Now they're hundreds of thousands. I think Justin Bieber spent like $1 million for one that had no real
Drake owns one too.
Yeah, but it was ridiculous. He spent millions of dollars and had no characteristics. It wasn't even as cool as the one I've got on the screen. But he did that because he wanted to have a Bored Ape that had certain qualities. That's what an NFT is. It's usually that idea of certain qualities are valuable, therefore folks will pay for them or use them. And then there's Decentraland, which is one of the many pieces of the metaverse. It's the largest right now that I know of as far as the sandbox where everybody's playing. Snoop has done concerts there, but there are several others. I'm saying these names too because as a lawyer in this space, you should know that this is the metaverse. This is where people are buying real estate, and we'll get into this. And what does that mean for cybersecurity going forward? So with that, I wanted to start talking through, Nick, just about each of these, just like blockchain. Can you talk about how, because we talked about what it is, but can you talk about how you're using blockchain for cybersecurity so that the lawyers out here would understand how they can put that into a program that they're making for a client?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest idea right on blockchain is it's just a database. It's just a distributed database that holds information, and the way that it's created, right, is how it actually secures the data within the chain. So when we're talking about security, right, analytics, contracts, anything that requires that forensic relationship to time is beneficial about utilizing the blockchain, right? Because when you're talking about public chains versus, I won't go into like private chains and stuff like that, but public chains, right? When you're able to create a instance of whatever that is, and NFTs are expanding so much now. The Bored Apes were just pictures. That was the extent of it. They had some cool traits, and it was rarity that everybody was buying, right? It's the fact that this is the one of one and things like that. But where we're at now, NFTs are being used in a lot of different areas. We use blockchain internally for doing data logging and things like that in the world of SIEM. Right, and making sure that you're actually having those analytics. The benefit of that is that
I will point out you said the world of SIEM, and I nodded, but I want to make sure everybody else understands what SIEM is. Can you? Right, thank you. Because I was like, I was like, they don't know what SIEM is.
So SIEM, SIEM, Security Incident and Event Management, right? So it's all of the stuff that your firewall does, all of that stuff that your antivirus does, all of those products. Right, that all these companies, I mean, millions and millions of dollars every single year in all these security products, right? But then you have to have somebody look at all that stuff,
right?
So you can buy a $10 million box and put it on your rack, but if nobody ever looks at the interface or the logs don't do anything, it was, I mean, for me, it probably checked the box on one of those compliance regulations, but the fact that it doesn't actually help the organization. So we're utilizing like blockchain for doing the alerting, the management of those logs so that we can create that timestamp. Utilizing things like public blockchains versus private blockchains allows you to utilize those for forensic reference as well. So in the case of contracts, you're seeing a lot more like real estate contracts and just business contracts that are being translated into NFTs to create a forensic timestamp of when that actual action happened. Plus, then you get the signature, the digital signature from both parties. And you can't deny that was it's kind of the digital what's the right notary, right?
That's right.
Yes. It's kind of like a digital notary for what that is. So NFTs, where they are now, where they're going in the future, I mean, it's the application. The utility as well, that like the reference for SEC, right, is you're either a utility token or you're not. And that can be NFT, that can be crypto, that can be all the rest. The SEC just says if it's an asset that has fiduciary value to an entity. So when you're talking about DAOs, DAOs, which is decentralized autonomous organizations, those tokens under the SEC guidelines are stocks because you're owning an asset that's funding something on the internet, albeit.
And so I'll say for the lawyers, securities lawyers who may be listening in, so the Howey test.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
They were playing. Right now, we've seen the SEC try to apply the Howey test to each of these digital assets.
And that was what, 1936 or something?
Yeah, it was a fruit tree.
Yeah.
Was
it
based
peaches.
on very different. Yeah.
So the application, right, and this is where we're part of Texas Blockchain Council. We're proposing for further regulation, and not necessarily regulation, but rules, right? Guidelines, those similar types of regulations, the ISOs, the PCIs, those guidelines, right, will help not only lawyers understand what those legalities are, where the line is, where the line isn't, but for me as a technical or as an engineer building this stuff, right. Right now, there's not, depending on what state you're in, depends on whether they consider a smart contract an asset or security versus just a computer system. I mean, there's certain states that are actually applying taxes to smart contracts, which essentially are just a computer. It's a virtual machine that runs on the actual blockchains. Those smart contracts are arbitrary. There's nobody that actually manages that stuff. Outside of organizations that actually are building business.
But one thing I will say, so this is, I'll say, a security moment for those who are thinking about these technologies. If your head is swimming about some of these technologies, please do ask questions, right? Because he lives in the weeds and I do.
Yeah.
So you have to bring us back out sometimes. But it's the smart contract world and using that like for security for the time signatures. We haven't seen yet how acceptable that will be before, like if you have an investigation, here's my public blockchain. Yep. The suspicion is that's going to be better than the affidavit from your records person that says, I agree that this was used in the ordinary course of business, that this will be better. But one thing I always say, Nick, we talked about this, is for like that smart contract for that NFT, it's only secure if you decide to use that. If your client is telling you, oh, I want to use this as part of my cybersecurity program, I tell them it's only secure as your wallet. So that term wallet is really important because all these things, like those who hold NFTs, those who hold crypto, you got a wallet with somebody. I don't know who, yeah, right? Like FTX, MetaMask, somebody's got it. There's a wallet that you're using to hold on to your digital asset. The security of the wallet is your security of your system. And so you're talking about nobody's looking at those smart contracts, that computer. But I've had the same situation where if somebody's not mining the MetaMask wallet, or they let the person who owned the MetaMask wallet that owned all the NFTs that were used in Decentraland and others, then they no longer, you immediately lose that access. That security is gone because that MetaMask wallet, that password, somebody's like, has Bitcoin ever been stolen? It was a great question, right? It's like, well, yeah, because to steal Bitcoin, you just need to steal the information of the wallet. Like it's just like anything else. Like you can go in a wallet and you can take it. Now it's harder theoretically, if you're using great credentials. But I will tell you, having used some of these wallets, not all these wallets and different holders that help you hold cryptocurrency have, in my opinion, enough security on their systems. So if you're counseling a client about using some of these great systems and accepting Bitcoin and those types of things, you also want to think through the security of what they're using to make sure the individuals that are making the interactions are who they say they are. That's KYC and AML. Go for it. Yes. I know. So there is talk about replacing. Sorry. So there was a great question, and I don't know if I can repeat it all. I'm going to boil it down and basically asking: is there a kind of a centralized database that's going to be the master for all these keys that are floating around for all these digital assets? Is that the right way to say it? Oh, that will do this for you. That will hold on to the keys. Thank you. Oh, okay. Is there an escrow service that holds it? Now I understand the question. So I would say there are absolutely escrow services that will hold on to these keys for you. I actually have clients that will do that for you. If you talk to, I can't say I've talked to Iron Mountain about it, which is NCC all the same now, but I would be surprised if they don't get into that soon. But I do have folks who we have, I was going to say, we have a Nick, like somebody who is not one of us that holds on to the keys. And then once the transaction's over, then you get the keys. I have a client that does models for the internet, like for the metaverse, and they hold on to the wallet until the client pays, right? And then we make the wallet for you, everything, and then here are the keys, and that can go through NIC or through an escrow service. That's part of that use of that private blockchain that we were trying to not get too deep into, but that's how you could do it too, is through a private blockchain.
Well, and there's a number. So I actually have a buddy who started the library. That's what he calls it. So what that is basically it's the Iron Mountain model, and it's a cold storage for those specific private keys, because whether it's the password in MetaMask or your Coinbase or whatever else, at the end of the day, anybody that has a crypto wallet has a file somewhere that has their 15 words, their 12, 15, 18, 21, whatever it might be, words saved, just like we used to do with our passwords, right? Because that word phrase, 15, 12 words, whatever it is, I mean, we don't remember our normal passwords. You're not going to remember that. So that's one of the greatest weaknesses on the wallets is it's not even necessarily the wallet technologies, right? A lot of people have the vision that MetaMask is a quote unquote wallet. MetaMask is just an app that gives you access to your wallet. Coinbase, Trust Wallet, all of them, they're just an app that takes that private key and allows you to talk to that network. So the actual key to your wallet is those words. The cold storage facilities, they basically give you a mini Pelican case, and it goes back into the salt mines, and whenever you want it, or if you need to recover it. The down part, or the limitation of that is ease of access.
That's right. You have to mean to go to it.
Right. So requesting that. So you're seeing a lot more services. HashiCorp, I don't know if anybody has ever heard of them, but they specialize in encryption. They're a really cool company. They do KMS and some other stuff. Not really necessarily specific to blockchain, but they do key management with hardware level encryption keys. So that key actually doesn't have to it can either be generated in the machine and never leave it, or you can use it for storage. But there are products, there are companies, there are organizations that are really working at helping the human element out, right, for being able to secure that stuff and actually get access to it should you forget your password, or I will say I have a hard drive at home that I have an encrypted partition on that I cannot access because I forgot the password that is about this long, and I've got 12 or 13 Bitcoin on there. So
there you go.
Yeah, I would love to have someone actually be able to have that service. Now that drives many moons old, but yeah.
So that was a great question. Thank you. So this is what we wanted to talk about. There are a couple other things we did want to talk about as far as technologies, but if you have other questions, let us know. So we just talked about the public blockchain, and even now the private, and the use of NFTs for cybersecurity, and that kind of great trail, reliable trail. Another thing we want to talk about is something called FIDO. Okay, has anybody heard of FIDO? Yay, okay, we got two in the back. But the reason why I mention it is because, again, I'm going to say this 50 times, reasonable security measures is now pretty much the standard for legal compliance. We saw it with FTC and Zoom saying MFA is not, if you don't have MFA for access to certain types of accounts, it is not reasonable security measures. There are times, though, that you're going to get resistance from your marketing team, from your lawyers who are like, we're not doing that. We want a frictionless experience for our users, and they shouldn't have to put anything else in. And I'm like, how many times am I going to hear that? I do it all the time.
Doctors are famous for that.
Don't start with the medical field. But they don't. Like, when you're talking to your customer experience people, if they haven't been educated, they're going to resist MFA. And so there's something called FIDO 2. I will not profess to know everything. Nick could talk for days about it. But I will tell you that I have been recommending it to clients because it is a passwordless system. It is done by the typical, it is in some way non-MFA MFA, because the MFA is like it's something about you, something you know, something you have, right? Kind of idea. You make a whole separate account, so you sign up for this whole separate account, and that's what's shown there, and you enroll in it. And this is your FIDO account for that particular system. The government's using it. I'm like, if the U.S. government is using this, because they have something called login.gov, it's FIDO 2. It's using the FIDO 2 protocol. And once you log into login.gov, you create a password. I didn't create a password, really. I use my phone, and I'm serious, my Face ID on my phone, because you choose what you're going to use. And then any other system that's connected to this instance, the login.gov, that's how I authenticate to that system. So for global entry and other things, you authenticate using this. So it's passwordless. I didn't have to use a password, but I will tell you what, to your point about the Bitcoin, if something happens to that phone, right, I'm not going to be able to get into that. There's no password I can remember that's going to get me into those systems because I logged in with that phone and signed up that phone and chose to use Face ID. And that is all I can use. That's the downside, but to me, that's not a big deal because then I just go back to login.gov, have to prove myself the old way with 50 security questions that I came up with, and I can get access to it. So it's a little bit better than your hard drive.
Yeah, I don't have any security questions.
I know, right? Yeah, but I just wanted to introduce that for folks, and Nick wanted to introduce that so y'all know that that's out there for those who are giving resistance to MFA.
Well, yeah, I mean, FIDO is great because of the way that it actually handles the user account like separation, right? Whether you look at FIDO, whether you look at Okta, whether you look at any of the other MFA providers out there, something that actually is something that you are that integrates that bio piece to it. I mean, I wouldn't go as far as like a blood sample, but you know, any of those kind of things that is this is me. Is what breaks the element of the password, right?
Right.
The password can be recovered. I mean, I share passwords all the time. You know, my Hulu password, I think my daughter, my 16-year-old, probably has given it to all of her friends at this point. You know, but that same mentality, right, is also why we use like crypto wallets and NFTs for doing digital rights management. If you have crypto in your wallet and you have NFTs in your wallet and they may be for a video game, they may be for movies, they may be for music, right? But if you're using that, you're probably not going to give that to your 16-year-old.
It's true.
So the level of security that people just inherently have around like their wallets and stuff like that, as well as, you know, the biometrics and all the rest, that is something that you can't just share. And that removes the stupid user element of you know, security in some of that. I mean, I'm sure everybody's seen movies where they've used the eye without the person, but
Yes.
you know, so there are always ways around it, but most of the new biometric stuff, they look for circulation and things like that. So
Yeah. It's
can't just cut his finger off.
Well, right. It's gotten pretty sophisticated. So the dead finger no longer works. So the new James Bond movie is going to have to incorporate that. Another thing that we wanted to talk about is the use of AI, right? So I kind of hinted at that already, that when I said Tessian and everybody's like, look with this cold stare of what are you talking about, Devika? So the reason why I mentioned Tessian is because it really is becoming, for a good security program, and for those of you who have a smaller law firm or like you're a solo practitioner, the security that there's no ethics credits for this, Greg, right? So, I mean, maybe I can add like 0.25 right now. But if you are trying to secure client files, the reason why folks are using things like Tessian is because a lot of clients are requiring DLP, data loss prevention, in an extreme way. So if you've got banking, if you have a client who has banking clients, so if you have clients that are banks, but also if you have a vendor that has clients that is banks, is what I'm trying to tell you that you represent, we are finding a lot of difficulty in complying with all the DLP things that they want from a legal perspective. Because like I look at it and I'm like, legally, does GLBA require DLP? No, it does not. So the law, Graham Blythe, does not say you must have data loss prevention. But the banks have interpreted that as, yeah, well, that means that you can only send emails to people who are whitelisted, which means, that's what I was talking, that's that old school way. Meaning if you send an email outside of your organization that has that bank's name in it and the address, the domain is not recognized, then it can't go. You just can't send that email. You have to take out the bank's name or take out whatever they've told you to do.
Whatever that sensitive information is.
Whatever
Right?
the sensitive information is. That sounds, I don't even want to lie and say
Daunting?
it sounds good. I was about to say, yeah, it sounds ridiculous because it is in a way. I mean, like, no offense to the banks, but that's very difficult to do in a practical way in a business that is sending hundreds of emails a day, right? Like, how do you really do that? So one of the things there's technologies is using AI to do this. So where you get smarter on what emails are going out, and testing is one of the leading. And there are others in the market that will disagree and say, we're leading. I'm just saying I see it most in my practice. How about that? I see testing most in my practice for kind of that solution with DLP because it predicts when you're sending an email, if it's out to a new individual, it'll say, ha, are you sure you want to send this? You've never sent an email from this person to this person before. Are you sure? It also prevents the situation where somebody's taking over your inbox and is trying to send a bunch of emails out. So, right, like but it learns. So after I've sent that email, testing will then be like, oh wait, you've sent that email before. So that may be okay, but you've never sent this with an attachment. And it literally you can have it sensitively alert you to all kinds of different things. And that's not the only tool, but there's other tools like that. And so I'm going on the kind of phishing detection too with testing on this list, because phishing detection is old. Proofpoint, everybody's been doing it. Mimecast, all these companies have been doing some kind of trying to catch spam and trying to stop phishing. But the AI component is really putting it on another level, because it's able to start learning what normally comes through your inbox. And so when something weird comes through that it hasn't seen before, it will send an alert. It's ridiculously annoying to users when they first start using it, because it keeps popping up. But after you use it for a while, I'll say as a user of it too, that it starts helping. It starts pulling things out that you would normally maybe have to spend time thinking about whether or not it's malicious. But Nick, I want to stop here to ask you, what other things are you seeing on the use of AI? I was talking about behavior and right, all these other things.
Yeah. So me personally, I won't get on my soapbox, but I hate the AI term.
I know. Well, do you want me to go into super
learning.
narrow? No. See, I'm gonna go here. So since you did this to me, so fine. There's different types of AI. There's super general and narrow. There's also different levels. So there's no super AI. There's no, that I know of. Right. There's no how that can know everything right now. There's general AI-ish, meaning it kind of can start thinking, like kind of make decisions on its own, but always based usually on its learning, which is the basic, the narrow AI, machine learning for a specific task. So let me change it. Nick, when looking at this, how do you think machine learning, also known as narrow AI, can be used in cybersecurity?
So based on the data set, right? That's what really makes this work. Is organizations out there that specialize in these tools. They've invested hundreds and thousands of hours into building their data set because it's that learning model. And that's why you get those alerts when you first start, right? Mm-hmm. You have to teach it. It's kind of like letting a toddler loose in your kitchen. You know, you got to teach it what not to touch and things like that. Understanding that AI isn't perfect. AI out of the box is as dumb as my 16-year-old. The application really is only as good as its data set. As you build that, and as organizations begin to build that, it becomes more efficient and more effective. What AI does, what machine learning does, whether it's security applied, whether it's, sports betting applied, whatever it is, it basically looks for anomalies. It creates a metric that's known as the normal. And when you exceed a value up to the, elevated or descended off of that normal, that baseline, that's when it becomes active. That's when it becomes interactive with whatever the user is or whatever it's supposed to do. The application of this, though, is as those models become better, right? As that data set becomes better, it becomes more efficient and learns. It's a bunch of if this then that statements. Yes. But at the end of the day, it does those if this then that faster than the human does, and it can create those statements without having that user interaction. Right. So it can create that baseline, and if X happens, then this happens. If X happens, then this happens. It's all based on the algorithm and built off of the data set and creating a normal baseline metric. Once you have that metric, you can apply data science and machine learning and all the rest to almost any area. Security is huge because security is so overbearing, misunderstood, cost prohibitive in a lot of cases, that it makes that more efficient, which cuts down the amount of time that you have to have invested in engineers, you have to have invested in technology, training, and all the rest. That you go back 20 years ago, and if you brought in a firewall, you had to have an engineer who knew how to use that firewall. Cisco iOS, Palo Alto's, whatever their name was. You had to have somebody that knew how to do that. The offsetting of that and the efficiency reduces the cost of business, right? And then increases the metrics of your effective and your efficiency. So security is a huge place that you're going to see machine learning as far as, phishing controls and things like that. You're also seeing it in the way that organizations are doing their alerting, their management, and their monitoring for not just their security, but also for a lot of their internal functions.
Right.
Whether it's contracts, whether it's clients, whether it's marketing. The building of the data set is what the key is to the application.
Absolutely. And one thing I want to say again, I'll be the lawyer who's like, that sounds great, but watch out, is the data privacy implications. Right. When you start having this automated decision making, it's a debate. I've talked to other attorneys. I would love to, if somebody in the audience wants to chat about it later, about, using even that in emails, because it's got to learn.
Yep.
So it's reading through. A person is not, but this machine is making decisions and then serving things up as make a decision yes or no to a human. So it gets you out of GDPR and automated decision making and some of the other automated decision laws because a human is required. We are getting to the point where some of these machines are making the final decision about don't send that.
Well, and part of it is like a lot of these are now have cloud providers and things like that. So where is that data actually being stored is the other key. Like the Russian GDPR kind of thing, right? They have to have all their data. The EU has
the data localization, yeah.
Yeah, the EU has to have all of theirs retained in whatever the entity the entity state is, right? These cloud providers that say, well, we make it fast, right? Understanding where that data is actually being processed is key from a legal perspective, because that privacy right, if you may be just buying a service and installing some software, but if that's actually putting it, into the Caymans or out of the country, I mean, U.S. versus Canada doesn't really matter too much. But when you go from U.S. to EU or the Middle East or Asia Pac or any of that, I mean, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, and you absolutely did. As we employ these emerging technologies, keeping the data localization requirements in mind, because they are real. Somebody was talking about how afraid they are of the South Korean data protection law. I was like, yeah, me too. Because when you get into what it really requires and like the China cybersecurity law, you don't want to end up using a tool that puts your data there, not because, coming from a legal perspective, that attaches to a right of a resident. More, it gives the government certain rights because now you've put it over there.
TikTok.
So right. Okay, I didn't say that, but yes. Exactly. But that's one consideration as you use these tools. Like Israel has a lot of great cybersecurity tools. I'm going to say it. They have a great startup market. A lot of things are coming out of Israel, but then you also got to think through where that's going through and what servers they're using. So I was trying to reserve some time for questions. We've got like 3 more minutes, Elizabeth, left. So we can keep talking for 3 more minutes. But yes, go ahead if there's any questions. Can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, so the question is related to quantum computing and the encryption that's being used in blockchain. Quantum computing still at this point hasn't been applied to the general market. So right now, it's kind of the security through obscurity, the nation states, things like that, they're still working on it. And in all honesty, a lot of the EDUs that have quantum computers are giving away time so that people actually learn how to program on them. It's just simply that they're too expensive, they're too big, they're too everything to have the general usage, right? Nation state, on the other hand, right, is where you're going to see quantum computers actually come into apply. Nation state versus nation state, things like that. That's where you're going to see quantum computers really kind of jump into the security element of it and really be applied to encryption algorithms and all of those old security controls. At the end of the day, it's still the depth and how long the password is, right? That really is the security. It's making it so that the protection in place is so cost prohibitive that it just doesn't make sense, because even with quantum computers and all the rest, it's still cost prohibitive for the average person to use. That being said, at some point in time, yes, the quantum computing will apply to the mathematics to whether it's blockchain, whether it's hard drive encryption, whether it's Coinbase's wallet or Wells Fargo. I mean, at some point, right, security being reactive, the bad guys get there first, then we make patches and we put walls up and everything else. So until there's a bad guy that actually does it and there's some news story about it, it's probably not going to happen unless, the Fed wants to come in and start playing with Ethereum, I guess.
Yeah. Well, any other questions? So I'll take the last. Oh, yeah. She said, okay, so we're on time. So I'll stop. I was going to talk about the difference between Ethereum protocol and Ethereum, the coin, but we'll talk about that later. Come meet me afterwards. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.